Hello everyone, Adrian here. So today I'm going to be discussing something that has been on my mind for quite a while, and I've discussed it extensively with my friends. And unfortunately I'm not going to be discussing Gothic literature or absinthe or opera today, but I really wanted to get a few things off my chest. Now, last year I made a video called Honest Goth Talk, which I voiced my frustrations about the Gothic subculture and how it stood. I realize now, looking back upon it, that I didn't phrase a few things as well as I could have. And my words were a bit misinterpreted, and so was my attitude and frustration, and I do apologize for that. I really do. And so I've noticed that things have intensified. They've gotten worse. And it's frustrating. It really is frustrating for goths out there who really do enjoy and genuinely love the subculture and everything that it has to offer. People who genuinely do enjoy the music and the culture and the mannerisms and the way we interact with each other and the art and the films and everything like that. You know, it's just frustrating to see it reduced down to a hollow shell. Angela Benedict did touch upon this in one of her videos, where she was talking about this shift in the subculture that has occurred within the last couple of years, where how goth you are is basically determined by how extreme you look and how much expensive clothing you have from big gothic designers. And she mentioned that, you know, things like true talent and intelligence and having a good personality, true knowledge of the subculture, and passion for the subculture suddenly don't matter anymore unless you look extreme. And again, I'm frustrated by the amount of, you know, haul videos and makeup tutorials and, you know, can you really be goth without listening to the music kind of discussion. So I do want to take you guys back to my roots as a goth. Now, to be fair, my experience as a goth did not start with going to clubs and meeting other like-minded individuals and listening to the music in the clubs and just having a really good time. No, it didn't start that way. And I imagine for a lot of goths in a small town, it didn't start that way. I was pretty much the only goth in a small town, a town of 7,000 people, in the middle of central Washington state, 2.5 hours away from Seattle, so things get a little tense. In my younger years, kind of figuring out who I was, even before I reached the age of 10 years old, I realized that I had a propensity and an inclination toward things that were dark and spooky and elegant. My mom may or may not be to blame for this because she was the one who encouraged my brother and I to read at a young age, and we would huddle around the TV and watch Dark Shadows on Sci-Fi when I was growing up, and we were always watching classic horror movies and monster movies on TV and on video and all that, and I was just completely inspired and transfixed by that. Now, as I got a little bit older, like 11, 12, 13 years old, that's when I really started diving into the literature. And I found that it really captured my imagination. I loved the way it was written, I loved the creative aspect of it, and the doom and gloom and the romance. It was just amazing to me. When I reached about that age, I would have a lot of kids around me, you know, kind of making fun of me for the stuff I was reading and taking my books away and, you know, being really mean to me. And one time I had the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe on my desk when I was in school, and they would shout, "Oh my god, she's reading a book about Hitler!" And I'm just like, dude, if you read the cover, you'd know what this book was about, okay? You know, learn to read, for God's sake. And so that got really annoying, and then there were a couple of students around me who would ask me the same question: are you Gothic? And my response to that was, what does that mean? They're like, I don't know. So thankfully by that age I had access to the internet, and I looked up Gothic. One of the things that popped up was architecture, another thing was literature, another thing was artwork, and finally I found my way to the Gothic subculture, in which the various websites and articles that I was reading detailed things that make up the subculture. And music aside, all the things that they mentioned, the art, the literature, the films, the gorgeous horror films that I loved growing up, the ones starring Vincent Price, and you know, the American International Pictures adaptations of Poe stories directed by Roger Corman starring Vincent Price. Oh my god, I lost my mind when I was a kid because that was the best thing ever. Oh, I loved it. And then, following that train of thought with the aesthetic that I grew up loving so much, I found the music. And of course they mentioned the basic, you know, Gothic rock bands from the 1980s and early 90s and whatnot, and I started exploring. Now, at first I did like the original Gothic rock from the 80s, but the problem is it got old really quickly because it all started to sound the same. And now, as I started to gravitate more toward classical music with my musical training with the piano and the cello and whatnot, and then finally into vocal training, the 80s goth music just started to appeal to me less and less. Now, one of the reasons for this, and this is especially true with Sisters of Mercy, unfortunately, just the droning, empty sound and the mumbling and the same 5 notes played over and over again, and just drove me nuts as a musician. And so branching a little further out into the 90s goth music, that's really what spoke to me, because it had, as a musician, it made musical sense. Oh, can you imagine that? Making musical sense. And there were things that my brain found musically satisfying, because my brain does this annoying thing of basically deconstructing a song that I'm listening to. And I don't understand why this happens. I can't turn it off. So my brain will be like, okay, what's the time signature on this? What's the tempo? What key is this in? Ooh, I really like that chord progression. That's cool. So those sort of elements really appealed to me as a musician and as an aspiring opera singer when I was listening to the goth music of the 1990s and the early 2000s even. So later on, after discussing this whole thing with the music and the literature and the artwork and the architecture, I loved it all. And I really adored the culture of the 19th century that I was constantly learning about through the literature, as well as, you know, reading biographies of people who lived back then. And that custom of drinking absinthe that we Goths have adopted. That's so cool. Absinthe is goth as fuck, yo. And so after discovering all that, I found the fashion. And admittedly, like I said, because I live in a small town where there aren't very many resources for finding goth fashion, I would look online, and guess what? I found ridiculously expensive clothes. I'm like, I don't have the money for this crap, what do I do? And I found thrift stores. I ended up finding a whole bunch of awesome stuff in thrift stores throughout the years, including this really, like, sexy, slinky, like, partly see-through dress. My boyfriend really likes it. And, you know, gorgeous skirts, and I would shop for tights around the Halloween season. You know, Hot Topic would have more of their Halloween-y gothic kind of looking stuff, and I would buy some accessories and some clothes at Hot Topic. Now that I have a job, and now that I'm a little older and my tastes for fashion have matured a little bit more, I gravitate more toward the neo-Victorian kind of style of gothic clothing, and I can find some pretty sweet deals on Amazon and on eBay for some, like, Victorian looking clothes at a really reasonable price. So that's how I found the fashion. When it comes to goth, it is really upsetting to see it reduced to just the fashion, because the way that I got into it, I wasn't just like spellbound by seeing a whole bunch of gothic makeup and, you know, Victorian clothes and expensive like Killstar brands and stuff like that. That's not what really captivated me. It was the soul of goth. And that's the point of my whole video here. Goth isn't in your closet. It's in your soul. And guess what? If you're goth, you're goth. You know? You don't need to look as extreme as humanly possible in order to prove that you're goth. It's in here, and it's in here, okay? And no article of clothing or, you know, artistically applied eyeliner or anything like that can make you more or less goth. It's what matters in here and in here that really counts. So on that note, I will go ahead and end my rant. I hope that you guys were able to, you know, get a little more insight as to why the current scene is really starting to get a little ridiculous, not gonna lie. And of course, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to discuss this with you. And as always, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye!